I was watching a couple of videos this morning, one by Richard Coughlin, one by Greatex, about Pat Condell, and how Pat is, a lot of his fans seem to be quite far right in their political opinions, and what Pat Condell's responsibility might be either for them or for their actions. And on the face of it, my first attitude to that was to think, well, you can't be responsible for what your audience do, can you? But at the same time, I am also thinking, well, in a way, maybe you are. Not so much for what they do, but in terms of your relationship to them, what kind of things you might want to say to them, and what kind of attitude you might have to them. And what it puts me in mind of, really, is apparently a long way away from Pat Condell and YouTube, but what it puts me in mind of is a band from the late 1970s called Sham 69 that was led by a guy called Jimmy Pursey. He was a Cockney guy, a Cockney geezer. And they had a string of hits in the late 70s, I guess, maybe early 80s. The Kids Are United, Borstal Breakout, a string of them, they were great. If you like that kind of shouty, anthemic punk, they were good. But it was a funny time, actually, I'm walking through mud here. It was a funny time, that late 70s, in popular music, and particularly punk music, which I was quite into at the time. Because it had come out of a period in which punk had kind of thrown everything up in the air. If you listened to music in the mid-70s, you were, chances are, you were either listening to music that your older brother liked, people like Emerson, Lake and Palmer or something like that, or things that your kid sister liked, the Basic Rollers or the Rubettes or ABBA or something. And there wasn't, and if you were kind of a teenager in that period, there wasn't a piece of music for you. And then punk came out, and it was fantastic, because it was just like sweeping the table clean, everything had to thrown up in the air, and aesthetics were up for grabs. What fashion was up for grabs, literally up for grabs. It felt like people were just grabbing things from second-hand shops and putting it on, a very kind of ragtag approach to that. What was appropriate skill levels was up for grabs, and also things like political positioning. What the politics of punk were is really interesting. There was actually a 3 CD set produced later on called The Politics of Punk, which was all a collection of punk that had kind of political lyrics, which I've still got somewhere. But anyway, the politics were kind of similarly up for grabs, and it's kind of weird mixture of nihilists and anarchists and people who had no political leanings at all, but were just kind of angry or bored. There's a lot of boredom going on. And if you went to a punk gig in like 76 or early 77, the chances are you'd see people with swastika t-shirts on, like Sid Vicious had, or you'd see communist insignia, or you'd see people dressed in the all black of the anarchists, or any combination of these things. It was just a very strange time. And then a bit later on, kind of late 70s, it started to polarise much more. It became much more politically aware of itself, I think, punk. And you get a distinct kind of faction which moved off towards the political left, or became more overtly outspoken about their leftist leanings. So you get people like the Clash, or the Tom Robinson Band, or Crass, or the Mekons, Gang of Four, these kind of folk, who to a greater or less extent were identified with the left end of the political spectrum, and did rock against racism and all those kind of gigs. And then there were a new kind of breed of bands that came out, which subsequently became kind of subdivided into what's called oi music, or oi. Bands like Screwdriver, the Four Skins, a bunch of other bands who, musically were very similar in many ways. Were, Three Chord Wonders, lots of shouting, lots of deliberately working class time associations and reference points, deliberately eschewing of any kind of musical skill in favour of energy and power and emotion and anger. But these other second lot of bands, the bands that became oi, were distinctly of the right, and overtly so in many cases. Racist, very conservative indeed. And so obviously they attract different kinds of audiences. And the audiences which would go to a Screwdriver gig tended to be skinheads, usually in those kind of green puffer jackets that were popular at the time, facial tattoos, that kind of thing. And that was the time, really, in which Sham 69, the band that Jimmy Pursey fronted, kind of came to prominence. and that's when they had some of their hits, the Postal Breakout, Kids Are United, those kind of songs. And their music, even though it was kind of the same as everything else, it had just some of those little differences, those little signifiers. It wasn't a subtle type of music, as you've probably gathered by now, but some of the subtle differences were more like some of the oi bands. They were shouty, and they were kind of deliberately working class shouty, and those tended to be more of the things that the oi bands, the skinhead bands, were into. And so as a result of that, their gigs started being frequented by members of the far right. And if you went to a Sham 69 gig in the late 70s, as I did, you were very likely to be surrounded by people in the same green puffer jackets doing stiff arm salutes all the way through if the Kids Are United. Facial tattoos, swastikas just here, very unpleasant people to be around. And that, you know, and to the extent that people who had different kind of political positions or weren't politically active, or who liked punk because of its open-endedness and its freedom and its refusal to be pigeonholed in any kind of political box, if you were in those kind of folk, you'd just stay away from Sham 69 gigs because they were too unpleasant and too politically loaded. And it was particularly a problem for Sham 69 themselves and for Jimmy Pursey. I promise I'm going to get back to Pat Condell a bit. Because Jimmy Pursey, by all accounts, and I've no reason to dispute this, was not of the right at all. In fact, he had leftward leanings, and that seems to have been borne out by his career since. He's, you know, he's done a lot of anti-racism stuff since. You know, really up until 3 or 4 years ago, in fact, as far as I know, he was still doing the kind of love music, hate racism benefits, those kind of things. So, so he was in a particular cleft stick at that period of time. Having one political ambition for himself, but being surrounded and cheered and saluted and applauded by people he loathed, apparently. And at that time, quite a few Sham 69 gigs ended really quickly because he just refused to go on. You know, he just said, I'm not going to do this gig while you arseholes are in the audience clapping. I don't want to see people in green puffer jackets with facial swastikas giving stiff arm salutes. I'm not going to do the gig. So he quite often they ended in just shambles, or they just stopped. And eventually, I think he must have had a nervous breakdown or something, what do I know, but he moved out of music completely at the time for a while, and into, I think he had a brief flirtation with interpretive dance, actually. I seem to remember a Riverside, which is an arts programme on TV at the time, an episode of Riverside which featured Jimmy Pursey doing this really, really strange and very embarrassing piece of interpretive dance, wearing all black. He was doing all this kind of stuff. Hilarious. It's on YouTube, I'll put the link below. But I guess he was trying to find a mode of expression that the skinheads would not follow him into, because you can't really imagine a skinhead contingent coming along to a contemporary dance performance of that nature and applauding politely or Sieg Heiling politely all the way through, can you really? So yeah, so he completely had to abandon it, and very volubly so. He was very outspoken about his rejection of the values of his fans. Actually, that move into interpretive dance, that must be quite a common thing, I think, or it's a tendency. I seem to remember a few years later, Kevin Rowlands, who was the lead singer of Dexy's Midnight Runners, we're not a punk band, but really good. He had a similar move, didn't he? It was a kind of choreographic flip out when he also went into the medium of interpretive dance. I don't know if he's on YouTube or not. I'll see if I can find it. Kevin Rowlands, very funny. They should do a duet. Anyway, they didn't. Never mind. The reason why I'm saying all that is, I'm just thinking, wouldn't it be great if Pat Condell did something similar? And by that, I don't necessarily mean he stops making talking videos and expresses his fear of a Muslim takeover using the medium of expressive dance. I mean, if he was to do that, I think that would be fantastic. I really do. And if Pat, if you're up for interpretive dance and showing your contempt of the Sharia law in that medium, I think that would be wonderful. But it doesn't really require that. I think it would be good though if you know, if Pat Condell, if you would think about just rejecting the people who are arseholes in your fan base. And I know there are arseholes in your fan base. I made a video about 3 years ago about Pat Condell's endorsement of the UK Independence Party, which I thought was quite a mild video. And I still get comments and PMs every week from idiots, basically saying Pat Condell is great, everything he says is fantastic, vote BNP, I'm with Pat, effectively is the sentiment. And I think it would do no harm at all if Pat at some point just stood up for what he really believes and said, you know, look, I'm of the right, I think UK independence is a good thing, I don't like Europe, and I think we are being too accommodationist towards Muslims, that's fine, but you should also say the BNP are arseholes. If you're a subscriber to me and you remember the BNP or the EDL, you should unsubscribe. I hate you, I don't want you at my gigs, and if you carry on doing it, I'm going to take up expressive dance. You should do that, but he won't though. Anyway, I'm down by the river. Isn't it lovely? Isn't it lovely here by the river near Truro? I'm just waiting for my laundry to be done. Anyhow, that'll do.